I'm curious your thoughts on the whole Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens thing. I know you have debated Ben in the past. You know Ben, so that might give you maybe a little bit of a different perspective from somebody like me who sort of mocks on him and shits on him regularly. um,
Yeah.
so just to catch everybody up on the gist of it. So Candace Owens, I mean, she was defending Kanye West back when he was having his outright Nazi meltdown. When
And still is
he
up
said,
to today.
I'm going DEFCON 3 on the Jews or whatever he said. And Candace was like, well, do we really know what he means? Like, then, Candace also had that very famous thing that she said about like, well, Hitler, if he was just trying to make Germany great, that's fine. The problem is that he was like a globalist and he went outside of his borders. It's like, I don't think that's the problem with Hitler. If I don't think that's it. But so back then, though, she would say those things and you'd barely get a peep out of Ben Shapiro. And it would be like, yeah, she's a host on the Daily Wire, free speech. What are we going to do? Like, hands off. Let's go here. But then now, recently, she's become more and more vocal. She brought on a rabbi to debate the rabbi. The rabbi accused her of anti-Semitism. She's had a beef with Rabbi Shmuley. But at this point, honestly, who hasn't had a beef with Rabbi Shmuley? Rabbi Shmuley's the most annoying man on the planet. And then now it seems like there was a falling out. We don't really know if she was fired or she left or it was mutual. But Jeremy Boring announced, like, we've ended our relationship, or however he phrased it. What do you make of that? Do you look at that and say, hey, man, even if Candace was being anti-Semitic, you guys, when you hear some racist shit, you say free speech. So why would it be any different in this scenario? You should still give her a platform. Or do you look at that and you say, yeah, there's some things outside the Overton window and they should be outside the Overton window. So, Ben has every right to do that and should do that.
I actually have some interesting insight on this because I watch some conservative content creators who are very small in terms of their audience, and a lot of people don't know about them. But they're regular people, and they just express what they genuinely think, and it helps me to have a better idea of what trends are emerging within, the conservatives, within the Republican Party. And one thing that was really fascinating to me is, there's a lot of backlash toward Ben Shapiro for firing her, even though I agree. I mean, she has absolutely said some pretty gross and anti-Semitic things in the past. I wish that she just focused on criticizing the Israeli government, because she did have some moments of clarity where she had criticism for the government of Israel that I agree with. And I think she could have been an effective communicator if she focused on that. But I guess her anti-Semitism got in the way. And I don't begrudge Shapiro for just not being in favor of that and not wanting that at a media outlet that he co-founded, right? So I understand where he's coming from, and I don't begrudge him for the decision he made at all. However, the fact that he made that decision, and let's keep it real, she was fired. Her last show on the Daily Wire, she signed off by saying, I'll see you tomorrow. So she was under the assumption that she would be back tomorrow to do another show. And then all of a sudden she's gone. But in regard to what I'm hearing from conservative content creators who, watch the Daily Wire, there's a growing number of people of color who are now identifying as conservative. And now they're looking at the Daily Wire and they're like, wait a minute. You didn't have a problem with Candace Owens saying some pretty terrible things about Black people, brown people, Muslims, yada, yada. You get the point. But the second she said things you didn't like about Israel, you get rid of her, right? All of a sudden, your free speech absolutism doesn't matter. It just falls by the wayside because you're so offended. And so they see it as, oh, Ben values Israelis more than Americans, and is totally fine with hosts saying terrible things about Americans who might be, politically minded in a way that they don't like. But nonetheless, there's still various minority groups that, hosts say terrible things about. And that's totally fine. It's totally above board. But once Candace criticizes the government of Israel, you get rid of her.
Right.
And that's the way that they see it,
Well, that's the way I see it, too. Because, the things she said about Hitler, no problem. The things she said about Kanye, no problem. But then it's when she's critical of Israel, that's when suddenly she's fired. Because you're right. If he had a blanket across the board, non-discrimination, you can't say racist things about anybody, and this was applied consistently, and it was applied to Candace, as and when it occurred, that's one thing. But it does sort of speak to this weird dynamic on the right where
Mm-hmm.
sort of like blatant anti-Semitism of the type that, you know, Trump has also trafficked in at times is fine, as long as it isn't directed at the state of Israel, because then you also come in contact with actually the biggest supporters of the Netanyahu government as a demographic group in this country right now are not Jewish Americans. It's white evangelical Christians.
Yes.
Who, of course, make up, you know, the most lockstep support for Trump and a key and very influential part of the Republican base. So I think that's why you get this sort of weirdness where flirtation with out-and-out Nazis, you know, blatant anti-Semitic rhetoric, that's all right. But the moment you have a critique of the actual Israeli government, that's where we draw the line. And the other piece with Shapiro that I think is a big problem for him is, you know, his platform, part of why it's so successful and why he's so wealthy is because his positioning as this like free speech warrior. And so that's fine if you're not that. But, you know, don't tell me about the Overton window when it comes to your platform, but then have a critique of the New York Times when there's a backlash over the Tom Cotton op-ed calling for, you know, military response to crush protesters. Like if you're a publisher and you've got your Overton window and you're allowed to do whatever you want, then you don't really have a voice. You don't have a say when it comes to New York Times or NBC firing Ronna McDaniel or whatever other free speech controversy you want to bring up that he was on, you know, the quote unquote free speech side of.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, you should remain consistent, especially if you've been making this argument about the value of free speech for so long. But again, at the same time, it's just so fascinating that all of the, I mean, Candace Owens, some of her worst anti-Semitic statements weren't even from this year. Like that's
Right.
the thing that's so mind-blowing
Right.
about all of it, right? So and look, I really do think that there are a few exceptions, I think. I do think that there are a few people who so far have been consistent in their free speech absolutism. However, I think most people who claim that they value free speech are full of it, because the second the speech touches a sensitive issue for them, all of a sudden, no, we want to silence them, you know?
Yeah,
but
that's Elon Musk syndrome.
Or what was
totally,
it, South Dakota that passed that, like, you know, here's the things that are anti-Semitism law, and it was like basically criticizing Israel.
There was like 12 things on the list.
Yeah. And Florida was doing some, Texas was doing some stuff too.
Well, anti-BDS laws too. Those are all.
Oh my God, I know. The BDS laws, how are they constitutional? How are
so
those?
They're actually not.
They are.
They get slapped down when they go through the court system. They get slapped down pretty quickly. I know Abby Martin went to court over, she was going to give a speech at some university
in Georgia.
And they were like, you got to sign this thing saying you won't criticize Israel. And she's like, no. And then she took him to court and won. Yeah.
Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.